All right, well, let's see how we go. And I think Helen has really framed this quite beautifully. And I think anyone that's listening along, hopefully will see a connection between the ideas. You know, a way forward. I really think there is something about design that we need to think about. You know, nothing really happens by accident, particularly when we're talking about policies, when we're talking about intentions, we're talking about metrics or measurements. We need to think like designers, as educationalists, as leaders. How do we create well-being by design? And in my view, it's really the future of leadership, is this idea of not being a task assigner, not even being a culture maker, but actually being a well-being designer so that people can thrive, because when they feel well, they do well. Why is that the case? Because we are multi-dimensional beings. I think it's Robert Frost that said, I am legion, I contain multitudes. All of us have multiple identities. We also have multiple aspects of that make us who we are. And so this is, I think, a really great way of thinking about well-being. It's the multidimensional well-being model. And so rather than saying, you know, a person is academic solely or social, you know, we are well when we have the convergence of our physical, social, mental, emotional, and spiritual health converging. And really, we can only thrive or flourish when all of those aspects are doing well. Of course, right now, and it's worth making this point, you know, I have a strong view that physical distancing is not the same as social distancing. I know that some fantastic epidemiologists would have come up with this term social distancing, but I just think it's super dangerous in some ways, right? Because we don't want to socially distance, we want to physically distance, but be as socially connected as possible. Not least of all, because it's one of the largest differences against stress and trauma and mental health, is how connected do we feel to the people around us right now? And that is the question we should be asking our students, our scholars. It's the question we should be asking our loved ones at home. How connected do you feel right now? And if the answer is not very, or I miss my friends, and you know, this is what young people are saying right now. As great as we are at delivering great learning, hopefully as teachers, you know, young people are saying they miss the social dynamic of a school. You know, really the beautiful dynamic environments. It's what make schools such wonderful places to be. I'm not sure, there's 3 T's, I've seen this kind of spoken about, but when we're responding to a pandemic, we really need to triage first, what's the most important thing to do, then transition, and then ultimately think about how we transform through that process. I mean, Stephen, I don't know about you, but if we are unable to reimagine success at this moment in time, concern we never have to do so, because it really provides not just a crisis and not just really quite serious implications for us as societies. It provides potentially the biggest opportunity to throw out, to your point, some of the old systems that no longer serve us. Now, rush back to normal. Which parts do we not want to return to at all? So that's my rant about social distancing and physical distancing. But so what does that mean for us as schools and as systems? Well, I want to start at the big picture again. And this is the OECD Wellbeing Compass. And I love the metaphor of a compass. And Stephen, you and I have spoken about this, but the idea is, great, we can talk about the learning map. We can talk about where young people want to go and they can make their own journey. What if the map is constantly changing? And frankly, you know, who knew that 2020 was going to be like this? It feels like it's gone for 6 years, remarkably. So it really is the idea is, can you as an individual society have knowledge, the attitudes, the values and the skills, and to build out core foundations and transformational or transformative competencies that enable you to really, you know, write your own story. And the piece I really like here is this idea of co-agency. It's not just saying to kids, go and do what you think, or let's do student voice. Yeah, what do you think about this? Well, we're still going to make the decisions because we're the adults. It's the idea of forming true partnerships and really paying attention to the prepositions that we use. You know, rather than doing school to kids or throwing learning at people, how do we do things not even for, but with? I think that's the deeper kind of question around co-design and co-agency that's emerging, knowing that at the end of this road is well-being for all. So the future of well-being, what is it? In my view, it's social, emotional, and academic. I don't think any of us would really be able to say that we haven't had too much of a focus on the academic outcomes. And that's just because it's easiest to measure. You know, we can look at Bloom's taxonomy, we can look at a whole range of other things. You know, it's easy to measure, just factual surface level knowledge, it's quite difficult to measure and therefore value things like compassion or empathy or, collaborative problem solving, which there has been some really interesting developmental progressions developed for. So I really think this idea of, paying attention to who we are as social and emotional beings alongside the cognitive is something that we should be having those conversations at the school level as often as we can. And I'm sure we can unpack that a bit more in the conversation. So if you haven't noticed by now, I just really like colorful circles placed on top of each other. It's Venn diagrams. I'm a huge fan of them. This is because they show in the simplest way possible how things interrelate and overlap. And here we've got knowledge, what we know and understand. We've got skills, how we use what we know, and we have character, how we behave and engage in the world. And then wrapped around that is this idea of meta-learning. This is called the 4-dimensional model. And it's created by a man called Charles Fidel from the Center for Curriculum Redesign, which is attached to Harvard. I just think this is a really good way to think about the work that we do. How do we support 21st century learners to develop their character, their skills, and their knowledge? Knowing that, mass education school systems really were developed for knowledge primarily and some skill. But of course, that's becoming more and more important to have this holistic 360-degree view. This is also something that we should pay attention to, because a framework or our strategic plans in our schools, they are what we pay attention to. That's really the role of them. And this is the Castle social and emotional learning model. And they call these the Big Five. This is some wonderful work that's come out of the Collaborative for Academic, Social and Emotional Learning in the United States, based in Chicago. And our colleagues there really have been doing this for 20 years. And so the idea here is, yes, we want to be able to do things and to know things, but ultimately, what are the capabilities? What are the social and the emotional capabilities, constructs, terms that we want them also to be able to do? I would say any of us are successful if we have high levels of self-awareness, self-management, we can responsibly make decisions, and that we have relationship skills and social awareness. And I'll just bring your attention to the idea of those 3 outer circles. You look at the classroom as part of the ecology, and then you can look at the school as also part of the ecology. So classroom, curriculum and instruction, be it intentional instruction, inquiry-based, project-based learning, whatever the case is. Where does social and emotional learning play a role? Where is it seen? How is it actually enabled? Then we've got school-wide practices and policies. And, particularly if you're a school principal, you have some control over those, of course. And then ultimately, how do we connect to the community? Because if we're sending one people at school and we have this amazing piece, but the parents aren't on board with that message, we have a disconnect. And there's some remarkable examples where we have young people basically going home and talking to their parents about some of these skills, quite literally, educating their parents around some of the wonderful skills that matter, things like self-regulation. And at this particular moment in time, of course, having self-regulation and having to study virtually as, someone completing school or someone in high school, that is just a crucial skill. How can you regulate both emotionally and cognitively to ensure that you stay on task and you can be productive, even though, there's constant disruption and uncertainty? And again, I think teachers have just been remarkable at doing this all over the world in terms of just being able to show adaptability. I love Mary Helen Imaldino Yang. She's a neuroscientist from the University of Southern California, if I am not mistaken. And she says it's biologically impossible to learn something if you don't care about it at some level. So this whole idea of, left brain, right brain, all these kinds of things, really the emotional centers and the cognitive centers are totally integrated in the neural architecture of our brains. So this whole be quiet and finish the task doesn't work. We need to be paying attention to how we feel. Because if we feel well, guess what? We think well. Now, the caveat I'd say about that is actually that's not always true. If you're just doing a repeatable manual task, that's just the one thing. It kind of doesn't matter how you feel, but as soon as you introduce even some level of creativity or cognition, then all of a sudden, you do need to pay attention to how people feel. And similarly, if you think well, then you learn well. So the last kind of things I'd say, Stephen, is as people are interested in education, in really not just engaging young people, but empowering young people with a compass for them to navigate this constantly changing world, this map around us. A great question we should start with is, what is our graduate profile? You know, what could our young people that are leaving this educational ecosystem, this environment that we work so hard to create, to be safe and healthy and engaging, what could they know, what could they do, and who could they be? And we should have a clearly articulated really statement of, this is the graduate profile that we want. We want people to be, young people to be agents of change, or be able to be confident. And it's not just about, again, what they know and can do, but it's about who they are. And that's why this is some of my favorite work, the values in action work, that is, it comes out of the VIA Institute on Character, for example. And this is strongly related to positive education, which is a fantastic global movement that blends positive psychology and education. Similarly, if we can equip young people with language for them to talk about who they are as human beings, that is crucial in terms of well-being. Because if I judge myself, Stephen, by just what I know, and it turns out I don't know very much about one particular topic, well, then I will be in this cycle where I effectively rate my value based on that alone. But, you know, there's only one Louka Parry, as far as I'm aware, in the world. And, you know, so how do I enable myself to have a sense of value for who I am, not just what I do and what I know, and this sense of kind of doing and being. Okay, last bits. I really think part of this whole conversation, and I think Helen picked it up as well, is growth mindset, fantastic. Individual focus, right? We want a young person to believe they can be better and smarter and persevere and be gritty and all that stuff. But in my view, it doesn't go far enough. And we're seeing some really interesting work. Like, what is kind of the emerging success? We've seen it again with policy in New Zealand, seeing it from the OECD. It really is collective well-being. It's the idea of generous mindset. How do I realize that, Stephen, if it's not just you helping me, you know, it's actually that our destinies are intertwined as part of the same human species. So that seems a bit planetary, but that really, I think, is what we're all talking about here. Great. I'm a school leader. I'm going to school tomorrow. What can I use? Here's one of the best resources that's free that I found, that I often refer people to. It's called the Greater Good in Action website, and it's from the Greater Good Science Center at Berkeley, which is in California, in Berkeley in the Bay Area. And they have some wonderful evidence-based kernels, practices that you can do with your staff, with yourself, and of course with your learners. And they're super practical, really, really key. A lot of them have a social and emotional learning base. Some of them have positive psychology, all the overlays. It's really wonderful. And this is what I want to leave everyone with, which is, in this world of the future, this digital world, the world of pandemics and uncertainty and adaptability and volatility, it's not just what we know. It's not just what we do with what you know. It's who we are. Because we are human beings, not human doings. And our capacity to continue to learn across our lifetime really is the greatest gift that we can give any young person, because it's the greatest asset that they'll take forward from this particular point in time.